Good morning. Al and Greta had been married for about 12 years. They had 3 boys, all under the age of 10. And though they had a fairly decent marriage, Al found himself more and more getting lost in wandering thoughts and wandering eyes. Al justified his wanderlust with vaguely formulated thoughts like, well, Greta pours all of her energy and time into the boys. She never has time or energy for me. I don't feel like she respects me anymore. I don't even think she's attracted to me anymore in any way. And any time that Greta would try to have a conversation about any kind of problem in their household, in their marriage, in their family, it showed up in Al's inner world as an assault on his person. And so over time, Al's perspective on his marriage took on this kind of imagery in his heart. Al was thirsty, and his marriage was a glass of sand. And so in his thought life, Al began to drink deeply of imagined water. I'd be so much happier with that woman. I bet his wife isn't like Greta, etc., etc., etc. And the more he soaked his thoughts with imaginary water, the more thirsty his soul actually became, and the more discontented Al became with the sand of his marriage. And that's when Tracy, one of Al's also married co-workers, came into the picture. And everything just seemed really easy with Tracy. The things that were important to Al were important to Tracy. She always seemed to have time in her schedule to talk about those important things. She admired his thoughts on those important things, and she even laughed at his jokes. Well, yada, yada, yada. Right? You know the end of the story. You've heard dozens like it. You know some Als. You know some Gretas, you know some Tracys, and you might be an Al, or a Greta, or a Tracy. Or even at this very moment, you might be in danger of being an Al, or a Greta, or a Tracy. And this very familiar, even I would say cliche story really sets the stage for our scripture passage this morning in our ongoing journey through the book of Hebrews. Hebrews 13:4 has brought us to the topic of sexuality. And last week I laid a biblical foundation for understanding how we, as products of our culture, have become, on the whole, pretty sexually messed up. Pretty sexually messed up. We saw last week why and how it is that we've taken our legitimate God-given needs for love and acceptance, and we've sexualized those needs. We've confused the need for authentic spiritual intimacy with sexual intensity, with the result that we mistakenly believe then that the deepest needs of our naked self, the whole naked self, for deeply meaningful spiritual and emotional connection are satisfied. We wrongly believe that those deepest needs of the naked self are satisfied in the mere connection of naked body meeting with naked body. But sex isn't all that. But we believe that it is, and that's why culturally we're driven to get more and more sexual satisfaction, but we're growing more and more dissatisfied as people. We're sexually glutted, but we're emotionally emaciated. We've sexually hooked up with more and more partners, and yet relationally, we're more and more isolated and more lonely than we've ever been. We're looking for God, but we've settled for sex. And that's the 40-second review of last week's 40-minute message. If you did not hear last week's message, you need to listen to it. Go onto our website, listen to the message. It's an important foundational teaching for understanding everything that we're going to build on in the next several weeks. And so with that foundational understanding in place, this morning I would now want to bring us back to our text in Hebrews 13:4, where we read these words: marriage is to be held in honor among all, and the marriage bed is to be undefiled. For fornicators and adulterers God will judge. Now, the meaning of two commands, because there's really two commands in this verse, the meaning of the two commands is really pretty clear. First of all, honor marriage. That's the first command. Honor means to put a value on something, to appraise something, to appraise it with premium value, in fact. And so in this case, we're to honor marriage. We're to put a premium value on marriage. We're not to treat marriage as something worthless. We're not to treat marriage as something cheap, but rather each of us is to appraise marriage in our hearts and in our minds and in our actions as something priceless. It doesn't matter if you're married or if you're single. It doesn't matter if you're old, if you're young. Honor marriage. Set it aside in your heart and mind as among the most priceless and valuable of things. Honor marriage. Clear enough. Secondly, the command for the marriage bed to be undefiled is pretty clear. Undefiled means uncontaminated. Without impurity. So in other words, pure. Without impurity, pure. So pure. The marriage bed is to be pure. And the English words marriage bed, as we saw last week, translate the original biblical Greek word koite, from which we get our English word koitos, which means copulation. It means sexual intercourse or sex. And so the undefiled marriage bed means sex without impurity. Sex without impurity. In other words, pure sex. Pure sex. Practice pure sex. Honor marriage. Practice pure sex. And what is pure sex? The rest of verse 4 brings clarity to that question. Pure sex is not fornicating. Fornicating is one of those old English words. It just means immorality, sex outside of marriage. Pure sex is not fornication. It's not sex outside of marriage. And also, pure sex is not adultery. Unfaithfulness, infidelity within marriage. And so the meaning of these two commands in Hebrews 13:4 is really pretty clear, even without me taking a few moments to, explain it a little bit more. Honor marriage and practice pure sex, because God will condemn the practitioners of immorality and infidelity. So clear enough? Yeah, it should be pretty clear. No new news there. All right, so this is what I want you to see then this morning is why? Why are marriage and pure sex such big deals to God? Why is it such a big deal? And this is what I want you to do this morning. I want you to pay careful attention to where the author of Hebrews goes in the next two verses after verse 4, because there's a logical connection in the writing here between verses 4 and 5 and 6. And it's a logical connection then that'll inform more than just your brain, but it will help you to take steps towards becoming unmessed up sexually. There's a logical connection here that will help you take steps towards getting unconfused between legitimate intimacy and what is just cheap sex, or sex, maybe I should say, serving as a cheap substitute for intimacy, for authentic spiritual intimacy. The logical connection between Hebrews 13:4, 5, and 6 is going to help us take steps towards getting those wires uncrossed. So let's go to the next slide. We're going to add verse 5 here to verse 4. Marriage is to be held in honor among all, and the marriage bed is to be undefiled, for fornicators and adulterers God will judge. So honor marriage, practice pure sex, and make sure that your character is free from the love of money, being content with what you have. Now, it's a bit of a head scratcher right now. It's a bit of a head scratcher. You need to understand that these verses are all one train of thought. Most of our English Bibles begin a new paragraph here at verse 5 because the author of Hebrews seems to be beginning a new thought about greed, a new thought about money. He's gone from the topics of marriage and sex and now to what seems to be a new thought on money. But verses 5 and 6 do not begin a new thought. They're a continuation of the previous thought in verse 4, and that's both structurally and grammatically. And I just want to very quickly explain how that works. That it's one just structural and grammatical train of thought. In the two commands in verse 4, the two commands are actually given in this staccato, almost caveman-like two-word stylization. There's just two words behind all that, and they're basically honor marriage. Just two words. Honor marriage. Second part, undefiled sex. It's almost like cavemen. Honor marriage, undefiled sex. You get what I'm doing? That same grammatical, structural, staccato, almost caveman-like two-word commands just continue on into verse 4. Ungreedy character. Contented now. All right, so, this is the staccato bullet point list here. Honor marriage, undefiled sex, ungreedy character, contented now. All right, so that's the structure here. And so what is the logical connection between verses 4, 5, and 6? What is the logical connection between marriage and sex and greed and satisfaction? Why is it that we should honor marriage and practice pure sex and have our character free from being greedy, consuming, takers, and hoarders? Why should we be satisfied, contented now in our present circumstances? We see the answer to that in verse 5. For God himself has said, I will never desert you. I will never, nor will I ever forsake you. So that we can confidently say, the Lord is my helper. I will not be afraid. What will man do to me? And so we honor marriage and practice pure sex and have character that is free from being greedy, consuming takers and hoarders. And we live lives that are satisfied now because God has said, I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. I will be your helper. All right, now let's put that on the shelf for a second. I want to go on a little field trip. It's important that you know here that the word helper in verse 6, when God says, I will be your helper, it's the exact same word in the original Greek. It's the exact same word that is used in Genesis 2:18 when God said of Adam, the first man, let's go to the slide, it's not good for the man to be alone. I will make a helper who is just right for him. I will make a helper. Now in Genesis 2:18, the helper is a reference to who? Eve. Eve, a woman. It was Adam all by himself, this man, and God said it's not good for this man to be all by himself, to be all alone. I'm going to make for him a helper. So it was a woman. It was a complement to who he is. It was a companion. It was a mate for Adam. And so now here in Hebrews 13:6, the Lord himself has said, I will be your helper. I will be your companion. I will be your mate. I will be your complement. I will be the one who helps you. I will be the one who gives of myself to meet your needs. That's what it means to be a helper. So that's the end of our field trip. Now let's go back to Hebrews 13. And so we honor marriage. Every single one of us, we appraise marriage as being priceless because God has said, I will never leave you. I will never reject you. I will be your helper. I will be your complement. I will be your companion. I will be your mate. I will give of myself towards your needs. That's why we honor marriage. And that's why we practice pure sex, because God has said, I will never leave you. I will never reject you. I will be your helper and give of myself to your needs. And that's why we live lives of being generous givers. That's why we live lives that are free from being greedy consumers and takers and hoarders, because God has said, I will never leave you, I will never reject you, and I will be your helper who gives of myself towards your needs. And we live lives of satisfaction now. Satisfaction in our present circumstances now, because God has said, I will never leave you, I will never reject you, I will be your helper and give myself towards your needs. And so that's why and even how we honor marriage and practice pure sex and live generous, unconsuming lives. It's because we're satisfied now. It's because we're satisfied now in our present circumstances in the Lord who has made all of these relational promises. All right, so now I want to take a moment then to connect these three relational promises of God. I'll never leave you, I'll never reject you, and I will be your helper. And I want to connect that then to our quest for authentic, legitimate spiritual intimacy. Last week, if you weren't here, we saw that the fundamental needs that God himself built into the soul of every human being are the needs for 1, unconditional love, 2, unconditional acceptance, and 3, enduring commitment. This is what those needs sound like. If you really knew the naked me, if you really knew the good, the bad, and the ugly of everything about me, would you still accept me? Would you still love me? Would you still pursue me? Would you still give yourself to me? Would you still trust yourself? Would you still trust the flawed, naked me with your unguarded, naked self? And would you continue to love and accept me no matter what? No matter what ugly, no matter what disappointing parts of me you discover. All right? Doesn't that sound like the cry of our souls? Yes, it does, because that's what our legitimate God-given hunger in our souls sounds like. But as I said last week, our search then to find satisfaction for our legitimate God-given needs, our search in one another will inevitably lead to disappointment. It's a setup for disappointment. Did you hear that? It's a setup for disappointment. Why? Because every single person to whom you would say, I need you to accept me, I need you to love me, I need you to commit to me, and it won't be easy because the naked me is ugly. Every single person to whom we would come with open hands in that way and look to fill our empty soul tank, any person we would look to is him or herself saying right back to us, no, I need you to love me. I need you to accept me. I need you to unconditionally accept me, and it won't be easy because the naked me is ugly, right? Now, we might think, and we do think, by the way, well, that's the perfect setup then. It's a perfect setup. Needy person meets needy person, and they come together, and voila, two wholly fulfilled, completely satisfied people. Is that how it works? No, we know that from experience. We know that from real life relationships. It's not a perfect setup. It's a setup for a perfect disaster. And if you're not convinced of it, think of it this way. If you take one mostly empty carton of milk and you combine it with another mostly empty carton of milk, you will not get 2 full cartons of milk, right? It just doesn't work that way. You will either get, 2 cartons of milk to share a little bit, and you will get either just 2 cartons of milk that are still mostly empty, or you will get 1 carton of milk that's feeling pretty good about the relationship, and 1 carton of milk that's saying, I think I need a little space. Right? It's not you, it is you. It is you. let's just be honest here, it's you. The empty you is just not enough for me. I need someone fuller than you, right? That's exactly how it works in relationships, and not just in marriage. This even is the way it works in friendships. We are driven by our God-given need to satisfy our empty love, acceptance, and commitment cartons, and we're driven to find that person who is a full and overflowing carton, full of overflowing love and full of overflowing acceptance and full of overflowing commitment. And we're driven by the belief that if I could only hook up with that woman, if I could only hook up with that man, then I would be satisfied. Then I would be happy. So here's the newsflash, folks. Men, that woman does not exist anywhere, ever. Women, that man does not exist. But we believe that he does. We believe that she does. And that's why we battle the temptation to dishonor marriage, to bounce from marriage to marriage in an effort to find that perfect partner who's going to satisfy the deepest longings of my soul for unconditional love, acceptance, and commitment. That is why we dishonor marriage. And that's why we battle the temptation to practice impure sex, to bounce from bed to bed in an effort to find that perfect partner who's going to satisfy the deepest longings of my soul for unconditional love, acceptance, and commitment. And that's why we battle the drive to be greedy, self-absorbed, consuming takers and hoarders who try to sap every drop from the mostly empty cartons of others. Gimme, 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 gimme. I need, gimme, gimme. Right? In an effort to satisfy the deepest longings of my soul for unconditional love, acceptance, and commitment. And so that's why we're so unsatisfied now. That's why we're so unsatisfied in our present circumstances, because our hearts are on a constant search. Our hearts are on a constant search for that person who does not exist. And we're disappointed and dissatisfied with every single real life person and every single real life friend and every single real life lover and every single real life spouse who was never capable and never will be capable of being for us what we demand that they have to be. The perfectly, unconditionally loving and accepting and enduringly committed lover of my soul. And so you can see how in our marriage dishonoring, impure, sex-obsessed, greedy culture of dissatisfaction, you can see how we're looking for the perfect fulfiller of our needs. We're looking for God, but we've settled for anything but God. God himself has said, and only God can say, I will never desert you. That should sound like unconditional, enduring commitment, doesn't it? I will never desert you. That's a promise of relational, unconditional, enduring commitment. That's one of the deepest needs of our souls. And so God himself has said, listen, I know the good, the bad, and the ugly of the naked you better than you even know yourself. And even still, I will never bail on you. I will never bail on you. I will never desert you. I will never forsake you. I am unconditionally, enduringly committed to you. So be satisfied, God says to you, in me. Be satisfied in me. And God himself has said, nor will I ever forsake you. That should sound like unconditional acceptance. Another of the deepest God-given needs of our souls. God himself has said, listen, I know the good, the bad, and the ugly of the naked you, and even still, I will not forsake you. I will never reject you. I accept you. Be satisfied in me. And God has said, I am your helper. That should sound like unconditional love. Another of the greatest deeds that God built into our human soul. God himself has said, listen, I know the good, the bad, and the ugly of everything about the naked you, and even still, I will help you. I will give myself to you. I will aim all of who I am at the needs of all of who you are. I will still continue to choose to give myself towards you. I will still choose to continue to pursue you as the object of the outpouring of who I am. I love you. Be satisfied in me. Do you see that? Unconditional commitment, unconditional acceptance, and unconditional love in God. So if you pull this all together, you can see that the very needs that God himself built into our souls, God himself will meet. And the very needs that we mistakenly take to others, and we demand from others, and we manipulate from others, and we seduce from others, and we expect from others, the deepest needs that they were never capable of meeting and satisfying in the first place, God himself has said, I am all that. I am all that. With the result then that the soul that is satisfied in the unconditional love and the unconditional acceptance and the enduring commitment of the Lord, that soul will honor marriage and practice pure sex and live a life of generous giving, not of greedy consuming, taking, and hoarding. Those commands flow out of the satisfied soul. And those things are such struggles in our culture because we're so unsatisfied. We are so unsatisfied. And when our souls aren't satisfied, if for whatever reason our souls and our beliefs and our attitudes and our actions have not been touched by the reality that God will never leave us, that God will never reject us, and that God will always be our helper who gives of himself towards our needs, if we're not in touch with that, if we haven't tasted and been satisfied with that reality, we may find ourselves, rather than honoring marriage out of a place of soul satisfaction in the Lord, we may find ourselves dishonoring marriage. As a soul unsatisfied single, you may find yourself coveting a marriage partner, or lusting for a marriage partner, or fantasizing about a marriage partner, or even flirting with a marriage partner that does not belong to you. You, soul unsatisfied single, need to honor marriage. You need to honor that person's marriage. You need to appraise as priceless that marriage that does not belong to you. And you do that by connecting the deepest needs of your soul, not to that person, but to the Lord, who has said to you, I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. I will be your helper who gives of myself to your needs. Be satisfied in me. Or as a soul unsatisfied single, you may find yourself disappointed about marriage, or bitter about marriage, or resentful about marriage, or even despising marriage. You too need to honor marriage. You need to appraise marriage as honorable. It's priceless. It's valuable in God's economy. And you do that by connecting the deepest needs of your soul, not in the false satisfaction that you derive, that's fueled in dishonoring marriage. But you connect the deepest needs of your soul to the Lord, who said, I will never leave you. I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. I will be your helpmate and companion and complement. I will be the helper who gives of myself to you. Be satisfied in me. Now, if you're a soul unsatisfied, marriage dishonoring married person, you may find yourself churning up and rehearsing your dissatisfaction and disappointment with your spouse. You're just like, drives me nuts. I can't stand. Drives me nuts. I can't stand. Right? You know that one. Or you will find your soul unsatisfied heart scanning the horizon for someone better, scanning your lust and scanning your fantasies for someone better, scanning the channels and scanning the web and scanning old flames and scanning romance novels for someone better. You need to honor your marriage. You need to appraise your marriage as priceless. And you do that by connecting the deepest needs of your soul, not to the illusion that there is some better, perfect partner out there who's going to fulfill your deepest longings. They do not exist. You need to aim your unsatisfied soul at the Lord who has said to you, I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. I will be the helper who gives of myself to you. Be satisfied in me. Or on the other hand, if you're a soul unsatisfied, marriage dishonoring married person, you may find that you shut down and withhold and punish and guard and self-protect. You know what I'm talking about? And you too need to honor your marriage. You too need to appraise your marriage as priceless. And you do that by connecting the deepest needs of your soul, not to the illusion, connecting the deepest needs of your soul, not to the illusion that those needs are satisfied and preserved in this white-knuckled self-protection, but by connecting the deepest needs of your soul to the Lord has said, I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. I will be the helper who gives of myself to you. Be satisfied in me. And in fact, the rest of verse 6 goes on to say to you, the Lord is my helper, so I will not be afraid. What can man do to me? I don't have to do this white-knuckled self-protection. It's like the Lord will be my helper. I won't be afraid. What can man do to me? Because I'm satisfied in the Lord. And if our souls aren't satisfied in the Lord, if our beliefs and our attitudes and our actions have not been touched by the reality that God will never leave me, never reject me, and will always be the helper who gives himself towards our needs, if we're not connected to that, then rather than practicing pure sex out of a place of soul satisfaction in the Lord, we may find ourselves promiscuously bouncing from bed to bed, or adulterously bouncing from bed to bed, or adulterously bouncing from marriage to marriage, because we're looking for what only God can do, and we're looking to that from just sexual partners or different spouses. I spent a lot of time on this last week, so I'm not going to linger long here, but if that's you, you need to practice pure sex, and you do that by connecting the deepest needs of your soul, not to the illusion that a new sexual partner or a new sexual experience will actually satisfy the deepest longings of your soul, but rather by connecting with the God who has said, I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. I will be your helper. But once again, on the other hand, if you're a soul unsatisfied, marriage dishonoring, pure sex non-practicing married person, did you get that? A non-practitioner of pure sex in your marriage, you may find again that you shut down and withhold and punish and guard and self-protect, and you too need to practice pure sex. You need to practice pure sex. You need to honor your marriage bed. So says the Bible. Okay? So says the Bible. And you do that by connecting the deepest needs of your soul, again, not to the illusion that your identity and your value and your deepest needs are preserved in your self-protected withhold, but rather by connecting the deepest needs of your soul to the Lord who has said, I will never leave you. I will never forsake you, and I will be the helper who gives of myself to you. Do not be afraid. Man can do nothing to you. Be satisfied in me. And then if our souls aren't satisfied in the Lord, if my beliefs and our attitudes and our actions have not been touched by the reality of the Lord's relational promises to meet our deepest needs, if we're not in connection with that, then we might find ourselves in this place of soul dissatisfaction, rather than living lives of generous, soul-satisfied, overflowing lives. we may find ourselves living lives of greedy, consuming, taking, and hoarding. And that may take the shape of financial greediness and materialism. We're actually going to talk about that a couple weeks down the road. But the unsatisfied, greedy, consuming, taking, and hoarding heart also takes non-monetary shapes like this. I'm just going to quickly bullet point these. The greedy, consuming, taking, and hoarding heart that is unsatisfied in the Lord may show up in non-monetary shapes like self-centeredness or ingratitude and unwillingness to serve others and unwillingness to be there for others, just being a bad friend. Just being a bad friend. I'm a consumer and a taker and a hoarder. Not listening to others, always talking about yourself, demanding and manipulating the attention of others. Just to name a few, you need to let your character be free from the love of consuming, from the love of taking, from the love of hoarding for yourself. And you need to do that by connecting the deepest needs of your soul, not to the moments of hoarded attention that you've stolen and manipulated and seduced from others, but rather in trusting the Lord who has said, I will never leave you, I will never forsake you, and I will be the helper who gives of myself towards your needs. Be satisfied in me. The Lord says, be satisfied in me. Be satisfied in me. Be satisfied and honor marriage. Be satisfied and practice pure sex. Be satisfied and be generous livers and givers. Be satisfied in me because I am the lover of your soul. And we're going to continue to build on this, biblical foundation of understanding who we are, understanding our sexuality, understanding our relationships. And next week, we're going to build on this then to, explore the topic of the search for the self. How do we discover that satisfied self? How do we connect the unsatisfied self in its identity and relationship with the Lord? So let's stand. I'm going to wrap up right there.